we're going to move over to Tina, who's got a whole discussion lined up on the Borders and Nationalities Bill. Tina.
Hello. Yes, we thought it's really an important development. Actually, that's not getting much news in the media, etc. But it is becoming a serious attack on refugees and people in Britain who might have their citizenship withdrawn. So we're looking at various aspects. We want to look at various aspects of this story of the Borders and Nationalities Bill. Comrade might have seen today in the newspapers, there's a job advert out from the Home Office that does talk about, the threat. We need to be able to deal with the threat and of refugees coming to Britain via the channel in particular. That's the big news story, isn't it? You can always get pictures of refugees coming over, and they're discussing it as a threat. The article also mentioned that they're still not ruling out using wave machines to get rid of refugees and to stop them drowning them, actually threatening their lives coming over here. And I think it's a really important issue that we actually look at refugees that, what they are, human beings who just happen to be born in a part of the world where, our governments have made it hell to live in many cases. We don't see most refugees anyway. They're not managing to come to Europe. There's actually the most refugees movements are in Africa and those areas. Only very few lucky ones actually manage to come to Europe. And the new Nationalities and Borders Bill is making a bad situation, a very bad situation, much worse. And we want to discuss this with a number of speakers. I'm going to show a short film first to show what the situation is already like, how bad it is already. This is a film by Migration Trials, and we have a journalist with us, Daniel. But before I bring him in, I was going to, hoping that Crispin can actually post a link into the chat by a message we received by a lawyer solicitor called Cornel Halil, who's been very instrumental in actually overturning the conviction of a few refugees who've been imprisoned as people smugglers, including an Iranian refugee who ended up steering his little dinghy because nobody else was able to do it, got here, was arrested as a people smuggler and sent to prison for 2.5 years. And this is a very powerful message we got in the chat. And thanks to Kate Adams, who's helped me to get all these wonderful speakers together. So Daniel, Crispin, can you find him? Daniel, I can see him now, yes. Hi, Daniel. Thank you very much for joining us. You're one of the journalists of Migration Trials who are actually highlighting what's going on across Europe. Can you describe to us what the situation currently is for many refugees?
Thanks for having me here. Yes, so the video you just saw is somehow the video that we're spreading around different countries to gather testimonies from witnesses or people that have had anything to do with these prosecutions to migrants and refugees. So what is happening across different countries along the external borders of Europe and now Britain has become one of these prominent places, is that in order to stop people from arriving, then police and public prosecutors are focusing on the criminalization of those people that are seen as facilitating the travel of others. And across seas, especially, like such as the Mediterranean Sea or the Aegean Sea between Turkey and Greece, and even across the Channel, these people are being identified as the boat drivers. Now, what the police and national governments are saying is that the boat drivers are the smugglers. They are the people that are taking the money from migrants and refugees that need to come to a safe country, and they are doing so in extortionate and dangerous ways. What instead is being witnessed and also confirmed by various trials and appeals, like the appeal trial that Tina was mentioning by Solicitor Kanel Halil, is that actually these people that are driving the boats are, in the majority of cases, refugees themselves, and they are being forced by the actual smugglers to drive the boats. Then what happens is that police authorities, when they intercept the boats on the across the Channel, often they take pictures and photos with drones of who is steering the boat, and then that person is arrested. Now, with the Nationality and Borders Bill, this is going to get worse, and the miscarrying of justice that will be happening to these people who could lead to incarceration up to life sentencing in prison, which is already what has been happening in other European countries. So I'm Italian myself, and in Italy and in Greece, and also along the Balkan route in European countries such as Croatia, people that are being intercepted and arrested with the accusation of being people smugglers are being given life sentences in prison. And this is often happening to teenage boys, most likely, that are the ones that are driving the boats because don't have the means to pay for the travel themselves. So obviously, sometimes the people that are being chosen are the ones that cannot afford the trip themselves, and that's why they are being picked to then steer the boat and take the blame. So the criminalization of these people is something that has been happening on for quite a few number of years, especially in these last 10 years, in these countries such as Greece and Italy, where the biggest and largest amount of refugees has been arriving by sea. And the UK is taking the example from the Greek and the Italian prosecutions of how to deal with this so-called problem by basically not inventing anything new, but just imitating the criminal justice response that is being given to a problem such as the migration crisis, that a lot of the evidence that me, myself, and my colleagues are witnessing will hardly be resolved with police mechanisms, surveillance, and the militarization of borders. So the investigation that we are running is somehow a comparative analysis between what has been happening in different countries and comparing it also to the UK. Somehow on this issue, the UK is coming a little bit behind other places because the crisis is hitting the UK. The UK is a destination country for most people that are trying to arrive to the UK. And so it's been felt first by the countries that are closer to the countries where people are escaping from. And then later on is being felt also in Northern European countries, and even to the UK just now. And so, yes, this is the means of the investigation that we're doing, and the aim is to prove with hard evidence and testimonies that the criminalization of these people is something that is happening, against the basic principle of justice.
Yes, really good job you're doing. I came across you in preparing this item, so I hope we will be able to speak to you at a future stage. I'm trying to speak to somebody else, who's Don Flynn. Don is on the steering committee of Permanent Peoples Tribunal, and he's been very influential. Hello, Don. He's written a few books on the question of migration, immigration, and is somewhat of something of an expert on the Nationalities and Borders Bill. Now, there's two aspects to the bill, aren't they? As Daniel mentioned, it makes the situation of refugees, asylum seekers, a lot worse. It takes out the possibility. I think it makes it much harder to appeal, etc. And there's another aspect to it, which we're also going to discuss later with Jackie Walker. This is the threat of taking away somebody's citizenship without even notifying them. So I hope you can shed some light on both these issues for us. Hello.
Hello. Yeah, thanks, Tina, and good morning, everyone. Yes, the headline issues are the impact that it's going to be having on asylum routes into the UK. It's effectively going to create a two-tier system in which the only people who will be acknowledged for refugee protection are people who have come from the official resettlement routes, which basically involves a long drawn-out procedure. It normally means that people who have been living in refugee camps outside the UK and very close to the zones of conflict in most cases, who after a long period of time have been pre-selected by the UN refugee, and they are then accepted by the UK and they're admitted into the country. Anybody who comes in outside of that procedure is going to be regarded as people who arrive spontaneously on their own initiative at the border and ask for asylum once they arrive here is going to be regarded as inadmissible. Their application is going to be regarded as inadmissible. And of course, the biggest group that we've come to learn about this in recent times have been people who are arriving on the small boats crossing the channel. And I think this is what has given the turbocharged the Home Office's appeal to the British people to understand the so-called refugee crisis as being entirely in terms of people who have been coming into the country on this basis. And what the government intends here is that they will be refused admission into the asylum procedures, and instead the Home Office will look to remove them to a so-called safe country. Now they're going to have huge difficulties in doing this, because that will require a resettlement agreement with a safe country. And at the moment, there are no countries which have agreed to do this. We've had talk of Rwanda as being a possible candidate, and also Albania. But it's no sooner that these countries are mentioned as possibilities than you get Rwandan and Albanian government officials denying that they're having anything to do with it. So the main effect of this is it's going to be putting a lot of people, or people who are arriving on the small boat route, into limbo, where they're going to be hanging around for 6 months, inadequately supported by anyone, until such time as the 6 month time limit is reached. And then the government has agreed that it is going to be assessing them for refugee status. And, you know, we have to, one of the important things to bear in mind here is that merely you come here under these routes does not mean that you are not a refugee. Even the Home Office admits, Priti Patel said in a statement to a Home Office committee, that 30% of the people arrive, even by her very minimalistic standards, that 30% of the people arriving by the small boat route are eligible for refugee status. Whereas in fact, the reality is, in accordance with a successful appeal statistics, it's well over 50% of people arriving by virtually any route ought to be regarded as refugees. So people will enter the appeal system, and the bill intends that there's going to be serious modifications to the appeal system. Some appeals will be one chance only. If your appeal is not successful, you won't have an opportunity to proceed to any further stages. Whole species of evidence that refugees might want to offer to support their own cases are going to be regarded as inadmissible, as mandatory. Judges will be instructed not to take into account the evidence that the refugees are offering on their behalf. And then even after all of this is, and also the inadequacy of legal support for people going through the refugee procedure. That's going to continue. It's very, very difficult, particularly with the short notice time scale that we're given, for people to be able to have adequate legal representation at these appeals. Now, assuming that you are successful in going through these routes, and I personally suspect that even then, a lot of people will be successful simply because they clearly are refugees. Now, what they are going to be getting is not full refugee status. If they come via the so-called illegal routes, they will only be given a provisional and temporary refugee status, which will continue for many years. And during the course of that, they will not be allowed the same rights to family reunification, which exist for other refugees. And there are also going to be issues as far as the financial support that they're offered. So that's that route. You've mentioned, and I'll deal with this briefly, I've been talking for a long time, but the question of the deprivation of citizenship. This is a power that the government has had for the Home Secretary, has had for a long time. And in fact, its roots go back to the Labour government when Jack Straw introduced this as one of Labour's nationality bills, where it became possible for the Secretary of State to take the decision that a person constituted a threat to normal civil order, and therefore they could deprive them of citizenship. The one thing to be said about that is that there were safeguards built into it. People couldn't be deprived of citizenship if it would render them stateless. They had no other citizenship to depend upon, and there were appeal procedures built into it. Now, this government obviously regards this as being an impediment to what they want to do, which is basically hugely extend the discretion of the Home Secretary to be able to rule out just about everybody, no longer the very high bar of somebody who constitutes a threat to civil order, but basically anybody who is regarded as frankly a pain in the arse, which could include people who of ordinary people have been convicted of a criminal offence, and right the way through to people who have been caught up in a sort of situation which I suppose is typified by the famous Shamima Begin case. Now, in some circumstances, the government is going to be able to, in circumstances where they claim that they have not been able to contact the person concerned, they are going to be able to deprive them of citizenship without notifying them. And this is offensive on a whole number of levels. The relationship between the citizen and the state is supposed to be one of the sacrosanct mysteries of the British Constitution, that a population consists of not only good, hard-working people who pay their taxes and so on, but it also consists of villains and ne'er-do-wells and whatever. But when it comes to the rule of law, it doesn't matter. They are all citizens and they all have rights, and the state has to respect that. Now,
Don, what does that mean if you take away somebody's citizenship? Are they deported then? What does it lead to?
Well, yes, they can be deported. A British citizen cannot be deported at the moment. So if a person is deprived of British citizenship, then they can be deported. Probably the majority of people who are going to be affected by this are people who are outside the UK. Their convictions or the charges laid against them are in a foreign jurisdiction. And therefore the effect of it will be that they will be deprived of any consular support, and they will not be able to rely on any assistance that the state would give them. My final point, and I'm aware of the time, is that this is going to affect a group of people. We estimate something in the region of 6 million people who are theoretically have access to another citizenship. Doesn't include people like me, born in the UK. Both my parents born in the UK. I can't be deprived of citizenship even if I do the most heinous and horrible thing, at least not at the moment.
Don't do it.
On that. But people whose parents were born outside the United Kingdom, and when there is a theoretical argument that the individual concerned will be able to access the citizenship of their parents, as with the Shamima Begin case, they can be deprived of British citizenship, because the government can say you can avail yourself of the citizenship of Bangladesh, Pakistan, whatever country they're talking about. So the charge of racism goes right to the heart of this measure as well.
Yeah, don't go away, Don. I'm going to bring in Jackie Walker quickly, who is just such a pain in the ass, as you've put it, potentially, because combined with the new policing and crime bill, I think this is particularly relevant, this new proposed law, because it also contains, I mean, you mentioned the national interest, it also contains that your citizenship could be removed by if you engage in unacceptable behavior. What on earth is unacceptable behavior, especially with the police and crime bill? Could be going on a demonstration, you know, tying yourself to something. So Jackie, you've been very concerned about that particular part, haven't you?
Not just me, but I and millions of other people of Caribbean descent have been really traumatized by it. And part of our trauma is the fact, you know, for me, that I've looked around at white comrades, at the Labour Party, at the media, and it's like, it doesn't matter. But can I just explain to people what this actually means, in particular for Jamaicans? Now, my mother held what was called a British Commonwealth passport. When I was 2, I was born in America, but when I was 2, we were deported along with my mother. Well, my mother was deported and she took us with her because of un-American activities. At that point, I held an American passport. When we came into this country in 1959, as far as my mother and the government of the time were concerned, my mother was a British citizen. That's what she was. And when you see in the newspapers here, they're beginning to say this nonsense thing that, again, nobody is challenging, that citizen is a privilege, not a right. That is totally wrong. Citizenship is a right and not a privilege. So my mother brought us here under what was, if you like, a moral contract with the people of the Commonwealth that we had a British passport. Now then, when my mother died, when I was 11, which was only just after Jamaica had its independence, we were taken into care. And because we were taken into care, we were naturalized as British citizens. However, my mother would have been actually deported from this country as part of the Windrush scandal. It's a scandal and it's still going on. And for lots of Jamaicans, what they see is, and I'm not going to discuss the technicalities of whether this is true, but you know, they've actually had foreclosed on them getting rid of us through the Windrush scandal, and they're now going to do it even worse, because what it actually means, and let's be clear here, is that they don't have to tell you that they've done it. There is no appeal, and you don't have to be told why they have done it. Now, I've been deported once. When I heard this was going on, I cannot tell you the level of trauma I felt. The level of trauma I felt to be separated from my children and my grandchildren. And I just want a bit more time to say something about this. The Labour Party has virtually abstained on this. They have said virtually nothing on this point. I had a look to see whether David Lammy, who, you know, people would think of as the person of Caribbean descent most prominent within the Labour Party at the moment, the last time he tweeted about this was in 2020. The EHRC, even though they've been asked to comment on this, have said nothing. Now, when I think of Margaret Hodge talking to us about having her bags packed because she felt an existential threat after she had told Corbyn allegedly to fuck off, or that he was a fucking racist. Can you imagine what it feels like for people of Caribbean descent in the Labour Party, active in the Labour Party, outside of the Labour Party, to be going through this again? And when people say to me, and they have said to me, Jackie, you know, it wouldn't happen to you, you know. I mean, just think about it. 5 years ago, I wouldn't have thought we would get bannings of people on demonstrations. I wouldn't have thought we would have had a witch hunt in this country, a political witch hunt. I wouldn't have thought we would have had a bill where literally, and I've had this in America, this for me is a rerun. It is what happened to my mother. There could be a knock on my door at any point, and I could be given 2 hours to pack my bag, and I would be on a plane. And that is my reality of where and how I live in this country now.
Thanks, Jackie. No, it does affect, as Don has said, six maybe more million people could be actually under threat from that, and it is a very real situation. So the bill, you know, has two parts to it, which are both very, very horrific. We're joined by Antonia Bright, of Movement for Justice, who has was trying to get us in touch with a refugee as well, who is in the audience, but his microphone doesn't work, unfortunately. But thank you very much for joining us, Antonia, because we really wanted to hear, and you know, I think it's really important that we see refugees as, you know, they're people, they're like us, they just have the accident to be born somewhere that, you know, our government's capitalism has destroyed and keeps in inequality and in terrible situation. So, you know, it would have been great to hear from him, but we can get perhaps to that at a different stage. But Antonia, you have a certain, you think there might be ways we can actually circumvent that particular bill. Can you talk to us about that? Thank you.
Yeah, I hope I can be heard okay.
Yes.
By the way, Mr. Q was still trying, so it might be worth after me maybe giving a second shot. We can fight back, and historically that has happened, but it needs to be very strong. It needs to be so much more than what it is right now. We're looking at an extremely racist, thoroughly racist and divisive bill, and along with the variety of other attacks from this government, a massive step to the right, to the very far right, you know, where politics is going right now. So there is a history of a non-cooperation when you know that something is being made law that is thoroughly unjust, that you have to fight it. You have to not cooperate with it. And we need to see pledges of non-cooperation happening from every area of life. And I think that has to start now before the bill's passed. When the RNLI had declared that they will continue rescuing people from the sea and they will not stop doing that just because it may be made unlawful, they said we won't be stopping. And then the government immediately had to run around saying, oh no, that's not what we were saying, and so, sort of tweaking what the meaning is. You know, just because something is passed in law certainly doesn't make it just. I think everybody knows that. But we need to see and organize as communities and in our unions and different places a determination that we will also not comply with this increase of racism, targeting and harassment that will be a souped up hostile environment, you know, that's being planned with this bill. And I think that this bill in some ways is an answer to the fact that in lots of ways, Priti Patel has been losing in court, the Home Office have been fought, did cross the channel and were convicted of steering, but there's a number of those convictions washed. So, the government solution is likewise to the Windrush scandal and other things, is to kind of bring in a bill that tries to codify what they've been trying to do anyway, and you know, change the law so that they can continue, but tie everyone's hands into it. So, I mean, we've passed, I brought a motion through my branch of my union to fight back against this bill and to fight for a position in more of the Labour movement, including the party, that it should be fighting against this bill. And I'd want to see that spread. Pledges like the RNLI made, you know, actions taken, threats of strike action, threats of anything possible to say we will not comply with this increase of racism and anti-immigrant attack that's divisive. Along with the, as mentioned just in the chat just now, the PCS union had threatened to strike over pushbacks. And that was interesting, that laws may get passed, but you know, they may not be able to be carried out. And that depends on the action and the compliance and the position of the wider society and the people who are being asked to carry it out. Do you carry out the harassment? Do you carry out policies that will lead to a death sentence for people? And we need a camaraderie and obviously, yeah, a movement that says no. People in Glasgow managed to block, you know, 2 guys, if you remember, was it last year, being taken by the border agency by blocking the vans. If that's the response to immigration raids, attacks, then this is actually an explosive policy. It's a thoroughly racist policy that is explosive in our integrated communities, and for, you know, many thousands of people who want to say no and just need to be organized in saying no, we don't accept this. CPS, the Home Office have found many policies many times get found unlawful that they're carrying out, but they carry them out anyway because they're sending a message that they're prepared to do this attack. They're sending a message that they're prepared to go after immigrants and so on. So the CPS, there are still charges against people. There are still people facing charges, facing court hearings, even after the you know, convictions, convictions and prosecutions of people steering boats had been quashed. There was a victory this year against the criminalization of people who had been steering boats, but there are still people who are facing hearings. So we're demonstrating at the CPS, they don't need to be carrying out any policy, and they shouldn't be trying to carry out prosecutions. They need to drop all charges, and we need to take action for that, not just for the people facing charges now, but to be building that movement, because when the Borders Bill comes in, it is seeking to make it easier to go ahead with prosecuting people, to criminalizing people. So the action is really for now. The 26th of January, we're going to be at the CPS to demonstrate for dropping all those charges and ending all these prosecutions. And we'd invite everyone to join there.
Can I suggest, Antonia, can you send us the details via email, and perhaps we can send it out to people who've come today via Crispin. Thank you so much for coming along. I think this is really important that we don't just rely on the Labour Party to do sweet F all, but we do it ourselves as well. As I understand, when the RNLA came out in opposition, they got the biggest donations ever in their history. So this is the kind of stuff we can do. On the website of Labour Left Alliance, we've got a list of refugee organizations, not charities. I think there's a particular problem with charities that we won't go into now, but groups that, like Movement for Justice, that are actually working with refugees themselves and encouraging and in solidarity and empowering them as well. So I'd urge comrades to check that out. Thank you so much for joining us. And unfortunately, Mr. Q's microphone still doesn't work, but perhaps at a future show we can bring him along. Thank you for joining us. Thanks. Back to Crispin.